Hi, hope you're all well. Matt from nTrack here. We've had a question on how to put a vocal mix together within nTrack and also whether this can be done with the nTrack mobile apps. It can, and we're going to get to that later in this video. But first, I wanted to kick off with a working example. We've been collaborating with a Norwegian singer called Lenea. She has sent us some vocal parts here. There's 5, 3 in red, 2 in green. We've written the instrumental. Let's hear how they sound together.
You promised me to fight. I almost lost my sight. I am here to stay, even if the sun goes down in a little.
When we received the vocal parts, they didn't sound like that. So Lenea's a great singer, but they didn't arrive processed. So for context, let me show you how we received these.
Me to fight.
Let's go through a couple.
Almost lost my sight. You promised me to fight. I almost lost my sight.
So great in terms of intonation and tuning and as a vocalist, but a couple of things hit me that obviously they don't sound as bright and processed as in the session here in nTrack, and also there's some hiss in the background. So those were some of the starting points for this session. Let's move on to mixing the vocals. We'll start by adding an Autotune to Lenea's voice. It's within nTrack and called VocalTune. We land on the medium attack preset by default. Now, Lenea is a great singer, and we don't really need to add too much correction or vocal tune correction to her voice. So let's move the correction amount down to a low medium here. That's going to tighten up a few loose ends.
You promised me to fight. Almost lost my sight.
So again, Lenea's vocal was already very good. That small amount of auto-tune though is going to tighten things up vocally. The next thing you may have noticed is that there's some background noise or background hiss on the vocals that were supplied. So let's remove those by going to the nTrack compressor and selecting the preset noise gate. Noise gate only allows a certain amount of signal into the audio file, and that signal can be adjusted by the threshold slider here. I like how this preset is laid out by default, so I'm going to go ahead and leave it as is. Let's see the difference.
You promised me to fight. Almost lost my sight.
It's subtle, but makes a difference in the final mix. The next thing that I'm going to do is to add a group in the output. So you see there's an output device here, which could be your speakers, your headphones, etc. I'm going to add the same chain of effects here to each of the 5 vocal tracks. And I don't want to copy paste them 5 times. It's going to take up a lot of CPU space on my Mac here. So instead, I'm going to route all 5 of the vocal tracks to the same group. And that will allow the same plugins to be added to those audio tracks. So what's the group vocal chain? Let's start with some distortion. Now, I don't want to go too crazy here because that could sound like a crazy guitar amp or something on the vocal, which could be a cool effect, but not what I want for the vibe of this track. So, blues drive isn't quite right. I'm going to go for vocal boost. With and without nTube. You can hear that brightens things up quite a bit. The next thing that we should do is add some EQ. I'm going to go to the graphic EQ here. Let's get rid of some of the muddy low end, and for that I'm going to manually carve in a chunk here around the 200 Hz range. That cleans up the signal before we go on to add compression to the vocal. Now we want to add a multiband compressor. And I like to choose the bright preset. I think it works well with Lenea's voice. Let's hear the difference.
You promised me to fight. Almost lost my sight.
So I think you can hear the difference there. It brightens and tightens the vocals further. I also want to add another compressor on top of that, just to get the level of the vocal right and to increase the signal. So I'm going to choose the compression preset.
You promised me to fight, almost lost my sight.
Just a subtle difference, but again tightens things up. And also notice that I've changed the panning. So the direction of the vocals within the mix and the volume levels as well with the slider here.
You promised me to
so an example of that
almost lost my sight.
Would be like this.
I
Put that
am
volume
here
slider
to
back to
stay.
-2 dB. The final thing that I want to add to Lenea's vocals is a send, which automatically defaults to aux 1 from the group to a reverb. And the reason that I want to send this to an aux is that I want to be able to control the reverb that I put on Lenea's vocal. I don't want it to be hyper reverbed, and you'll hear what I mean now.
You promised me to fight, almost
Let's
lost
put
my
ambience 2,
sight.
that reverb preset. And we
I
can
am
control the
here
level of
to
that reverb.
stay.
I also do want to copy-paste the VocalTune to the individual vocal tracks. I'm not putting that on the group because I want to have more independence on the amount of correction that I add to each of the vocals, and the same with the compressor, with the noise gate preset. There is a kind of different amount of hiss in each of the vocals, so I want control on that. I also want to set all of the vocals, the other 4 vocal parts, to group 1 to ensure the plugins are added to those waveforms as well. And yeah, everything together sounds like this.
You promised me to fight, I almost lost my sight. I am here to stay, even if the sun goes down in a little.
I've also set up an example here with all of the plugins muted so you can hear the difference.
You promised me to fight, I almost lost my sight. I am here to stay, even if the sun goes down in a little.
And to return to part of the original question, can the vocal mix be done on the iOS and Android N-Track apps? It absolutely can. So you can take these mixes on the move with exactly the same functions, plugins and presets as I've just gone over in the desktop version walkthrough. So here's my instrumental. Here are Lenea's 5 vocal stems.
I almost lost my sight. I am here to stay, even if the sun goes down in a little.
Also, for your information, the Graphic EQ and Multiband Compressor plugins are not available on the iOS and Android apps. So that's the only difference from the desktop walkthrough. Thanks guys, have fun with your productions. I hope that helped. We're going to make these videos more regular now. If you could hit the notification bell, that would be fab, so that you know when the new videos drop. And if you could give us a subscribe as well, that would mean the world to us. Thanks a lot. Bye.